This is the third instructional video on the use of the MPAT 2014 Excel spreadsheet. In the first video, we showed you generally how to use the spreadsheet, and in the second, we showed you how to customize the weights and values. In this video, we're going to show you how to take results from this spreadsheet and then copy and paste them into a new file so that you can conduct your own analysis. So to begin with, we're starting again with the original file using the hypothetical data. So let's go here to the Village Results tab, and here we see the results for Village 1. Now let's say that we want to compare the results for Village 1 and Village 2 using this radar graph format. So to begin with, let's compare the results from the component values. So because this is Excel, it's quite easy to select the cells you're interested in and then copy and paste them. So first, to do this, we need to create a blank file. I've already done this and called the file MPAT Results Analysis. Of course, you can label the files as appropriate. So to begin with, on the first sheet, basically we are going to copy and paste this data into the top of this new worksheet. So just to make this a little cleaner, I'm going to increase the width of these columns. So now going back here, there are a couple ways to do this. One is to go to Edit, Copy, or alternatively, once you've highlighted the cells, you can right-click and select the Copy option. Now, open your other file, the new file, and here we can once again right-click, and let's go Paste Special and select Values. So here we're only pasting in the values. Now here what you'll see is it's giving us very precise values. Now of course for our interest we would probably only need these values to one decimal place. So we can highlight these cells, right click again, go to Format Cells, and here under Number you can indicate that you only need it to one decimal place. Okay, so this is our data from Village 1. So let's label this Village 1. Now let's go back to the original file and let's get our data for Village 2. So we return to the main spreadsheet, and here, using the drop-down menu as we did before, we select Village 2. Now of course, when you're using this, you will likely have more villages to choose from. This again is just an example. So now the data for Village 2 is loaded, and here we already have the component labels, so we don't need to copy these again. We can simply just copy these values. So again, right-click, copy, go back to our new file, and again, right-click, paste special, only the values, okay. And once again, I'm going to format the cells so that only one decimal place is showing. Now, of course, you can wait until you've pasted in everything and then selected it one time to change the formatting. So now, if we want to graph this using a radar graph, usually Excel is able to intuit what type of graph, how you're trying to create your graph. So here under Charts, usually the radar graphs are under Other or towards the bottom. So here we find them at the bottom, radar graphs. And I'm going to select the first one. And as you can see, Excel automatically creates this nice graph where we can overlay the results from Village 1 and Village 2. Now you may wish to clean up the presentation of this graph, and so one quick way to do that would be to center this and move the key to the top of the page just to create more room. And so here in this example, we've just very quickly seen how you can copy and paste the data from the MPAT Excel spreadsheet, paste it into a new file, and quickly make your own graphs in order to compare, in this case, two villages. Let's do this again, but using a different example. So I'm going to scroll down on this page just to have some more room. And now returning to the original spreadsheet. So again, these are still the results for Village 2. Let's say we want to compare something more specific. So let's say we're interested in comparing just the subcomponent results for example, domestic water supply. So here, once again, we can select the cells we're interested in, right-click, copy, go back to our new file, and then here, right-click again, paste special, values, OK. And again, we want to be sure that we're labeling things correctly. So if we go back to our spreadsheet, we see that this is still the data from Village 2. So, and again, of course, it's not all that important which one is labeled first or second. So this is Village 2. And now I'm going to go here, back to the original file, in order to get the data from Village 1. So again, with the drop-down box, I change it to Village 1. It takes a moment for the results to update. And then I go back to domestic water supply, this time selecting only the values. Now in this case, because we're using mostly hypothetical data, the data that's preloaded into the spreadsheet, these numbers will be quite similar. So I've now pasted it in, and I will now label this Village 1. And then here, this is what I was saying before, you can wait to format the cells all at one time. So format the cells, number to 1 decimal place, OK. And now in this case, perhaps we want to create a different type of chart, so maybe even just a simple bar chart. So all I've done here is I've selected the data I'm interested in using. Then I went to Charts and selected Bar Chart. And here we have a simple bar chart. Again, in this example, the data is very similar, so we're not seeing noticeable differences, but this is just an example. Now, let's take one final example of a more complicated and potentially more interesting level of secondary analysis you can do using the data created by this spreadsheet. So now we're going to go to the Household Results tab. So we've been working with the Village Results tab, and we're now moving to the Household Results tab. As a reminder, what this tab shows is each row are the results for an individual household. And so initially it's providing the results here for all of the subcomponents. And then as we scroll to the right, we have the results for all of the components. So let's say I want to select all of this data for all 60 households. So I start by selecting this top left box, Food and Nutrition Security. Now I can scroll down and go to the last cell. So now I'm going to I started at the top left and I'm now at the bottom right. Now before I click this cell, I'm going to hold down the Shift key. Now when I click, it automatically highlights everything in that selection. Now once again, I can right click and select Copy. And I now return to the new file that we've created just for this type of analysis. And I can choose this box, C, right click again, paste special, values, OK. And it will now paste in all of the data for all 60 households. Now here, of course, the data looks a bit messy compared to what we're used to seeing in the Excel spreadsheet, but we can clean this up quite quickly. Since all of the data is still selected, I once again right click and I go down to Format Cells and again to Number and select 1 decimal place. Similarly, you can work to change the way the cells appear again by going back to Format Cells, and here you can change the alignment so that it looks better on your screen. Not to spend too much time with this, but we can try wrapping the text. And here we see, since we've expanded the size of the row, the height of the row, when we wrap the text, we can quickly see the labels for all 10. Now, since it's important to keep track potentially of which households these are coming from and which villages these are coming from, I would advise adding 2 more columns, one for village and one for household code. And again, to quickly get this data, we simply go back to our spreadsheet, scroll to the left, and here AA3 code is again our village code. So once again, I'm starting all the way at the top. Oh, excuse me. The village code is here in column K. So I start all the way at the top, go down to the last cell, hit Shift, and then click to select that data, right-click to copy it, and I return to our new file. Now again, in this example, we only have 2 villages we're working with. But of course, with larger data sets, you'll likely have more than 2 villages. And lastly, let's just do the same thing for the household codes, just to keep our data organized now that we're moving it out of the Excel spreadsheet and into our own file. So here I go to column B, the household code, and once again I start first by selecting the top cell. I scroll down, hold Shift, and then click the bottommost cell. Right-click to copy, return to the file we're working with, right-click, and now I paste this data here. So what we've done now, and I'm just going to zoom out for a moment, is we now have all of our data for 2 villages. We have the results for each individual household for all 10 components. Now, of course, there's a lot we could do with this data. But first, Excel is going to have trouble understanding this, cells where we have missing data, MD. So we need to replace that with something else. Now, there are a number of ways to deal with missing data, but for simplicity's sake, let's select, again, our entire range of data by clicking the top left cell, holding Shift, and clicking the bottom right cell. And now we're going to hit Control F, and we're going to go to this option, Replace. And so we're going to tell it, find every instance of MD and replace it with nothing. Now, again, there are different ways to deal with missing data, and it depends what software you're planning to use for your analysis. But for now, for the sake of simplicity, let's just leave those cells blank. Now we select Replace All, and it takes a moment, and it's replaced 13 instances of this missing data. So we can now close this. And now when we return to our data, we see those instances where there was missing data are now left blank. So what can we do with this data? Well, one of the many benefits of using the MPAT results is that they are all on the same scale and they're all quantitative. So there are a number of different things we can do. But to start with, let's explore how we might look at the relationships between 2 components. So for example, perhaps we feel there is a relationship between the scores on the domestic water supply and the health and healthcare. And we might hypothesize that as scores on one indicator increase, scores on the other indicator increase since they are related. So one way to look at this would be to select these 2 columns, and then we can graph this using a scatter plot. Let's see. So here we go down to scatter, and we choose the first one, marked scatter. So at first glance, this doesn't appear that useful. And the reason is because of the scale. All of our data is within a relatively high score range. So in order to get a clearer view, we can select the axis and format the axis in order to change the scale. Now, we know from our MPAT, from the Excel spreadsheet, what the range of our data is, the min and the maximum. But here we can also just eyeball it, and we can decide to set the minimum value at 50, and the maximum value we'll keep at 100. So let's now change the minimum value here to 50. And we hit OK. So now, as you see, the axis, the scale has changed. Let's do the same thing for this axis. Here, once again, we change this to 50. We keep the maximum at 100. And now we see a clearer spread of the data. Now, at first glance, there doesn't appear to be a very strong relationship. But this is just one way to look at it. Another way to look at this same relationship between these two components would be to do a very simple correlation calculation. So let's take this graph and move it to the side. And just using this cell, let's do a quick correlation. So in this box, first you insert the equal sign. And now from this cell here, you have a choice of a number of common functions. You can either type these in, or you can select them from the list. So here, the command is correl for correlate. Now it's asking for the two arrays of our data. So the first array, we're going to do all of the values for domestic water supply. So again, we click on the first cell, scroll down, hold shift, and click on the last cell. Now for the second array, we want to compare these and see how do these correlate with scores for the health and healthcare subcomponent. So again, we click at the top cell, scroll down, and click on the bottom cell. So now we have our data. And I'm going to close this, and we see here the correlation, and let me zoom in on this a little bit. The correlation is 0.147. So this confirms what we see here in our graph, that there appears to be a positive relationship such that as scores increase for one component, they increase for the other as well. And this is in line with what we would expect, that households with a better situation with regard to health and healthcare would also be more likely to have a better situation with domestic water supply. However, we see that this is not a particularly strong correlation. Now again, this, like the examples above, is only intended to give you a clear idea of some of the options you have for analyzing this data.